come out that will alter this election completely and totally. But you know, recently...
And that's Congressman Ron Paul, who is still in the race, believe it or not, people, for all those listening. And he's pushing hard as well. And I'm joined here by Sonny Thomas, who is rallying with a Push for Paul campaign here in the Miami Valley. And Sonny Thomas, it's nice of you to come by. And why don't you talk about yourself and what you're doing here with this Push for Paul campaign?
Well, glad to be here. First thing, I'm definitely a diehard conservative by any stroke of the imagination.
No.
As far as the show itself goes, this is pretty much just like-minded people from all different political stripes who are coming together with their talents and trying to get one last push for Paul before the Ohio Republican primary on Tuesday, March 4th.
Okay, cool. Now, you say you're conservative, and Ron Paul, you know, he's registered under the Republican Party. And a lot of people can give him that libertarian-leaning Republican deal. And, of course, you have your neocons or neoconservatives as kind of what the flavor of the month is now with the Sean Hannity and the Mitt Romneys. And John McCain is just hated on, and he's somewhere in that spectrum. So maybe you can kind of clear things up for me and for listeners there. What's the relationship that a lot of libertarians and Republicans kind of have in common? Where do they find the ground on?
Well, probably the most recent libertarian that actually had some merit was Senator Barry Goldwater, who in '64, when he got the Republican nomination, a lot of his platform was true libertarianism. He was definitely strong on defense. He was strong on keeping everything fiscally responsible, keeping the government accountable, try to keep it as small as possible, away from people like the Rockefeller Republicans, who is like Bush. He's definitely a Rockefeller Republican. But he's also a little bit softer on some social issues too. I mean, he was actually pro-abortion, but he was more at the state level. He didn't think the federal government really should have been as much involved in that than the states. The states should decide. And actually, Paul has echoed a lot of the same philosophy that he has. And so that's one thing I like about him is the fact that Ron Paul has a record to stand on. I mean, if you compare him with the other candidates, which kills me, Sean Hannity always his babbling about, oh, gee, who's the most conservative guy we've got here? He mentions everybody but Paul. Paul has a record to stand on. He's been consistent in his platform for the past 30-some-odd years, and the other guys just don't have anything compared to him. I mean, Hillary's a joke. Obama's an empty suit. He has no accomplishments whatsoever. McCain is a rhino, pro-illegal immigration and amnesty. He's also suppressed some of our First Amendment rights with the McCain-Feingold Act. I mean, if I want to donate, as much money as I want to my candidate, I should have a right to do so, not $2,300. I mean, you know as well as I know, especially with inflation of the American dollar, $2,300 doesn't go very far.
No, exactly. And, of course, why put a cap on spending limits? I mean, I guess the rationale is like, well, all the money's just going to go to the big-name candidates and such. Well, I mean, what if you're supporting the little guy, like in this case Ron Paul is, and you can only put so much in. And
well, even look at the Democratic side. Mike Gravel's still in race. You hear anything about him?
No, I thought he had dropped out. I saw him on the New Hampshire ballot, but that's it. I mean, I haven't seen.
But I don't think I've heard a formal dropout. I think he's still there per se, as an alternative to voting for the other two evils. So, he's the nadir of this 2004 election.
Okay. Well, a lot of people give that comparison to Dennis Kucinich with Ron Paul. They consider him the Kucinich of the Republican Party. And they're very similar in terms of the civil liberties. They're both big defenders of the Constitution, First Amendment, and the protection of those constitutional amendments. Why does Ron Paul get that stigma? Why does he get labeled a nut by the mainstream media?
You also got to understand most of the people, as well as the mainstream media, are all bought and paid for. I mean, pretty much you could look at Fox News. I mean, it was a new light and a new media because of the fact that, here's someone with a little bit of a conservative lean, and they got lambasted. I mean, everybody's like, oh, Fox News, Well, if anything, at least we could say Fox News. We can call them Fox News because a lot of the female ladies on there actually got some nice legs, so I guess it would be Fox News.
Oh, yeah.
But the main thing is they gave conservatives a chance to, echo their spiel, like, okay, Jerry Falwell actually had a chance to talk on there, Ann Coulter. You never would have heard that stuff on CBS News Tonight. I mean, it just was unheard of. but they're so far left that it's like, it's pretty sad when I have to go listen to Rush Limbaugh, America's anchorman, to have him spin it the other way around enough so I can get somewhat of a centralized idea of what's going on. I mean, that's just unheard of. Or I have to have Bill O'Reilly go out there and tell me all about the sanctuary cities that are going out there. I have to resort to Bill O'Reilly. He's the lone voice in the wilderness. I mean, come on. You got someone, a principal like Ron Paul, who's got a record to stand on. It's like, hey, you know. I mean, if here's a perfect example. If a family member was asking you for money, okay, say, hey, man, I need money for this, whatever. Doesn't matter what the reason is. If they borrowed money from you before and they didn't pay it back, or they give you a bunch of BS about what they're going to do about it, you're less likely to give them the cash, right?
Exactly.
But if it's someone that, hey, man, I'll borrow some money off from you, I gave it back to you on time, or even if I had an issue, I told you, hey, I'll catch it up to you a week later, and I pay it back, you're more than likely to do it. That's called integrity. Well, who else in Congress has more integrity than Ron Paul?
Got a point. Yeah, I would say Gravel, but he hasn't been in the Senate for 20 years. So,
yeah.
You mentioned the Barry Goldwater comparison, and I also wanted to bring up the fact that the Republicans were looking for like a new Ronald Reagan, I guess. I guess they're just writing off Bush 41 and 43 altogether, and they're looking for that rub off from Ronald Reagan. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't even Ronald Reagan give the rub to Ron Paul? Because he was the only one that supported him in the 76 campaign.
He was one of four congressmen that supported Ronald Reagan in 76.
Yeah, and I think even as he was leaving office or something, he nothing but praise to Ron Paul about how his integrity and how he echoes those old school conservative values.
Which kind of surprised me that Nancy Reagan didn't step up for him.
I think Nancy Reagan's just wanted to stay away from it altogether.
I understand, but still. I mean, Barry Goldwater Jr. stepped up for him.
Yeah, that's nice.
Twice.
Yeah, that's another thing I wanted to bring about Barry Goldwater. I saw a documentary about him on PBS, and I liked a lot of his deals. I'm a libertarian myself, and and again that we can get into that later about like how we get kind of that negative stigma as we're nuts, and of course if you're conservative, a lot depending on what people view as conservative or liberal. I mean, because that definition here in America is actually so different than what it is in Europe or any place else. But what killed Barry Goldwater was with the '64 Civil Rights Act, I believe. And his position was that federal government shouldn't mandate what the restrictions and stuff, because of course in the South you had the color only, white only bathrooms, restaurants, everything like that. And of course that Civil Rights Amendment was a federal law, and he refused. He said the federal government shouldn't have any place in that.
And he was right, but he did support the Civil Rights Acts of '57 as well as '60. But he thought that the '64 one was going a little too beyond the powers that it should have been. The bottom line was it should have been a state's issue. I mean, for example, we can look at it in the prism of history and go, hey, man, that was kind of wrong for them to do what they did in Mississippi, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as the states' rights platform, that was their right to say, hey, we don't want to do this. And, of course, Mississippi is the poorest state in the union per capita. But the bottom line is they made the decision not to allow integration. And that's their right. But, I mean, we can look at it and say, well, that's different. But you got to look at it. If you were a Southerner in 1964 and all this calamity was going on, I think you'd be kind of like, hey, we kind of got, we lost the Civil War. Now, 100 years later, you want to fight it again on a different platform? I mean, there's all sorts of different things that could go on with that thing. But the bottom line is the federal government has to be told that there are some things that should not be touched, that the state should decide. I mean, I'm on the fence about the abortion issue. I mean, me personally, I can't understand a society where they'll quickly embrace abortion, but they turn down capital punishment. I don't understand that. You're killing the innocent, but you're letting the guilty sit under taxpayer money under a roof and just rot away. I don't understand that. I mean, the advantage of regulating abortion is the fact that there's some medical stuff. Otherwise, some of these girls will end up doing, back alley abortions and stuff like they used to, and that's not a good idea. But, I mean, it's a moral issue. But it should be for the states to decide, not the federal government.
Yeah, so if, Ohio, say, bans it and stuff, you should be able to, like, if you want an abortion, to go to, like, Indiana or Pennsylvania to go take care of that. And, seems how neither one of us are doctors or women, we can't really judge on that, And again, that goes into a whole another argument there, and we can talk about it, too, definitely. Sonny Thomas joining with us for the Push for Paul campaign. It is happening March 1st at McGuffy's House of Draft. Ooh, very nice.
Yes, I've done a lot of shows there. The owner's been very supportive of all the shows I've done over the past several years.
Now, I take it him being a bar, he's kind of suffered from the Ohio bill to ban smoking in a
he's not happy
place
with
like
it.
that.
Yeah, he's not happy with it. But I have some reservations about that as well. Because I mean, the bottom line was it was put on the ballot. The people were able to decide if they wanted to do it or not. And of course, the smoking establishment tried to do an alternative one to mislead the people. And it's like, a perfect example. Okay, you want to talk about classical libertarianism and what's happened since 9/11. I mean, this whole country's going down the tubes, PDQ. I mean, I look around where I live and I see cameras everywhere. For example, down in Springboro, where I live at, I went down there and I asked the city about that. I said, well, who's running those cameras? They didn't know. How could you not know? They're in your jurisdiction. So I went next door to the police officers and asked them. Well, we're not watching them. Well, who is? So I called the Secretary of State. And the receptionist came online. I said, hey, can you tell me who can I talk to who's watching us through these cameras and stuff? She goes, well, actually, I couldn't tell you. I was like, well, isn't the Attorney General the top cop in the state of Ohio? Oh, they like to think so. Oh, I bet your boss liked to hear that. So she just told me to call ODOT. So I called ODOT and they said, well, actually, the municipalities put them in. They should know. They're the one watching. So they totally misled me from the get-go. So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, Springboro, which is a nice, fairly robust neighborhood and stuff, lots of big housing developments down there. They got all these cameras and stuff, but yet you go next door to Franklin and Carlisle, there's no cameras. Can you explain that? That doesn't make any sense.
It's just the bureaucracy of bigger government, actually.
But they should have came to us and said, hey, we're going to start installing cameras in there, and then we could have, went around, got signatures, and put on the ballot and say, we're going to have this repealed. I mean, that's one of the things I'm going to do next. I'm going to start going door to door. I'm going to have all my information ready to go and say, we need to get these taken out. It's a matter of principle. We weren't asked. They just decided to demolish their administration building and build a new one. Was it on the ballot? No, they just confiscated the money and did it. They didn't even ask us. So, I mean, how would you feel about that?
I would feel pretty bad about that. I feel pretty cheesed off. And that's an important thing about what Ron Paul is pushing for, that the individual really kind of takes care of where their surroundings and is able to be informed about the processes that go on. But, of course, the argument can be made that if you're going to do that, well, you're pretty much going to have to vote for almost everything, any public service, any goods for the most part. And I guess the argument for both parties would say, like, hey, well, these little things people don't need to know, and with voter apathy as well, like, so high. I mean, how are you going to motivate somebody to care about all these things?
I know my one uncle, he's never voted. He said it doesn't matter who's in office, we're screwed anyway.
Well, then how do you get rid of that apathy, and how do you create the incentive for people to really get involved, to make sure that they're at the polls every time an issue like this comes up, every
Ron
election
Paul.
cycle? Okay.
I firmly believe that this Ron Paul revolution is very similar to Goldwater's in '64. In 1960, he wrote The Conscience of a Conservative. He set a movement going because at the same time you had the hard left, these Maoists and all these other anarchists that were going down there in Berkeley and doing all this stuff, and then you have Goldwater's group started getting a voice for themselves, and it's like, wow, it started going like this, which kind of branched into neo-libs and neo-cons, sort of, because everything got twisted over time. But if you've ever read The Conscience of a Conservative, I mean, there's 99% of the points that he lists in that book are still valid today. But let's look at the thing comparing Goldwater and Ron Paul. Goldwater refused to compromise on his principles and his platform. He drew the line in the sand and said, this is where I stand, and that's it. He even wrote a book and put it out during the campaign. This is where I stand by Senator Barry Goldwater. So he had it written out so you can see his whole platform. Ronald Reagan got elected because he compromised. And the sad thing is, if you look at most of his cabinet as well as Bush Sr., they're all CFR members. Nothing against someone like Casper Weinberger. I mean, he did a great job, but he was a CFR guy.
Oh, the cancel foreign relations. Now you're kind of stepping into Alex Jones waters over there.
Yeah, well, I'm not a 9/11 truther, but I will say this. I've seen some of his films, some of his documentaries, and his evidence is pretty damning.
Oh, no, his information about the police state here and abroad It's unbelievable. Now, yeah, the 9/11 truthers. That's all. That's a whole nother issue, and that's just that's some people's cup of tea, others not. But for the most part, and Ron Paul does talk about this police state, and I think one thing that is real is this North American Union. I saw this on your poster.
Mm-hmm.
Just say no to the North American Union. Why don't you, if you can, tell the listeners what that is. If you can break it down in ways they can understand, and just say why Ron Paul is against this. Why is it bad for us as a country?
I'd love to. Well, actually, if you look at the whole plan, actually the plan's been fairly secret for several years. Some interconservative circles, like the Council of Conservative Citizens, were one of the first ones to publish the complete Monty of what the North American Union plan entitles. And it starts with the TTC, which is the Texas Trans Corridor. And they make it look like, we're just kind of making an expansion of the highways, make it a little bit easier to travel, which make sure you remind me to tell you more about how they're making us embrace this philosophy that they have through consumerism. But what they're doing is they're trying to build this main huge corridor highway starting in Texas. And actually there's a lot of Mexicans coming across the border to help build it. And a lot of people don't know that. These aren't Texas Department of Transportation people that are doing it. These are got Mexicans over here building the thing. And so what they're doing is, I forget the exact port that it's going to be in Mexico, but if you look at the Mexican map, about 3/4 of the way down the coast before you start hitting Central America is the main port where they're basically going to be starting this from. And all the products are going to be coming in from China, and they're going to start there so they avoid all the U.S. tariffs and taxes and inspections and all that other stuff. Now, Bush has already passed laws stating that Mexican truckers can drive on our roads. Well, they don't adhere to the same regulations we do. Their vehicles aren't up to snuff as ours are. Heck, they could be having a leaky gas tank. That's okay in Mexico, but here, that's a problem. And as many times you see some, dillwad out there flicking a cigarette, they could spark a fire in the truck that's behind you. So there's a note, don't litter. And so you start there in Mexico, you go up through to Kansas City. Now, that's pretty much where it all spreads out. It intersects with I-70 there, which branches out east and west. And then it continues north up into Canada. I forget exactly where it ends, but it goes up to there. So in essence, that totally washes away some of our national sovereignty, and which is interesting. If you look at the EU model, this is one of the reasons why the Brits said, okay, fine, we'll be part of the EU, but we're not taking on your currency. They were smart to keep the pound. The pound is still worth more than the euro. I've gone over the last couple of years. Let me tell you what, especially to the dollar, whatever money I had to spend over there was drastically cut in half. And then I got hit with the exchange rate again when I tried to exchange some of my money, so I didn't even bother. So, it's getting crazy. So if you've watched Endgame by Alex Jones, he goes a little bit more detail about the EU, the NAU, and, of course, the Asian Union that's going to be coming up next. The African Union is a loose...
more like a confederacy at this point.
But they really don't have their act together. It's going to be a long time before they get the economics, even some of the infrastructure put in place to make it effective. But there's a couple of power players on that continent who are going to pretty much run the show. You know how it is.
Okay. Sonny Thomas joining us for the time being. His Push for Paul campaign rally is at McGuffy's House of Draft, Saturday, March 1st, 2008, at 55418 Burkhart Road. Call 256-3005. It'll be at 7 p.m. Tickets are $5. You got the second scene, Bliss for reunion show, one night only. Assailant, Breckenridge Band, Perfect Norm, and of course you're going to be giving the keynote address here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. How we play some PSAs real quick, and then we'll play. I'll play Skeptic and ask questions and see if you can give me the Ron Paul answer to those questions, and try to convince me and try to convince any listeners who are on the fence here. Give them a reason why they should vote for Ron Paul in the Ohio elections coming up next month.
Definitely.
All right. This is 106.9 WWSU, Dayton's right choice. If you have any questions during the breaks, dial 775-5555. And again, you're listening to Wright State University Radio, WWSU 106.9 FM.
WWSU, Fairborn Dayton, the superhero of college rock.